morning. For those who don't recognize my voice, my name is Karen Arnold. I am the Grant Program Manager here at the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning and welcome you for taking a few minutes out of your day to learn more about the Keystone Historic Preservation Grant Program. With me today is Shelby Weaver-Splain, who's our Education and Outreach Coordinator. I'd like to thank you very much for pulling together this webinar opportunity for us. And also Scott Doyle, who's the Division Chief for the Grants and Marker Program here with the Commission. Our agenda this morning is to provide a brief overview of the eligibility and important aspects of both the guidelines for both the project and construction categories in the program. I'll try to give you some tips for pulling together a competitive proposal and identify some common pitfalls and deficiencies that we often see in applications. We'll take a few minutes to make sure that you understand how to apply Pennsylvania's statewide preservation plan goals to your projects. Familiarize yourselves with the evaluation criteria and our grant process, and conclude with expectations as a grantee if you're selected for funding. I'm then going to push the mic over to Shelby, who will share some of our Preservation Happens Here hashtag initiatives. We'll pause several times throughout the program for questions, but for the most part, if you have any questions at all, there's no audio associated with it from our participants, but you're able to communicate with Shelby via the chat feature. I will like to note that our webinar does not actually cover the basics of how to fill out the single application for assistance. We recorded that separately to give us a little bit more time to allow for questions. So you're able to find that through a video tutorial on our YouTube channel. Your PDF slides, you'll be able to click directly on that link to be able to find it. The other opportunity that you have for questions throughout the application process is through our DCED's Customer Support Center. They're always very happy to answer questions and deal with your technical problems with the online application. We've also built in some links throughout the application process that will be able to answer most of the questions that might arise for you if you have some concerns about some of those questions. Just some housekeeping for our webinar today. Again, we'll be taking some breaks throughout the webinar for any questions that you might have. You'll be able to ask those questions through the chat function through Skype. It's in the bottom left-hand corner. Shelby will be able to answer them as we go along, but we'll probably stop and talk about some of them in a larger setting if necessary. Our webinar is recorded, so if you need to break away, you're able to find that recording available on our website after January 28th. Or on through our PHMC YouTube channel. So let's get started. For those who are not familiar with us, we are the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. We are the official state agency in the Commonwealth that deals with history and cultural resources. We're divided into 4 sections. You might be familiar with some of our other sections, including the Bureau of Sites and Museums, with our regional history centers throughout the Commonwealth, the Pennsylvania State Archives, the Pennsylvania State Museum, and of course, us, the State Historic Preservation Office. Our grant division is housed within the SHPO office, as you sometimes will hear it called. So keep in mind what our agency mission is when cultivating a project. We're certainly attracted to certain types of preservation projects, usually resources that have interpretive programming or increase the availability or accessibility to historic buildings in the Commonwealth, and also those projects that ensure preservation outcomes. Our Keystone program, we're excited to announce we've just embarked our 26th year of this grant making. We share Keystone funds with other state agencies, so you might often hear about the Keystone program associated with both DCNR for projects that deal with trail projects, community park and playground projects, or the Department of Education for capital projects at community libraries, and finally at the state system of higher education. PHMC also uses a share of our Keystone funds for capital improvements at our historic sites, much like the effort at Cloister. And we're very pleased to be able to share with you that the Keystone program has made a huge community impact throughout the Commonwealth from our initiatives and those with our sister agencies. The allocation for the Keystone Fund comes from the Keystone Recreation Park and Conservation Fund. It's a set aside from the realty transfer tax. Again, it provides funding for both the PHMC, DCNR, the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, and the Department of Education for Commonwealth Libraries. Allocation is growing from our share in recent years. We've had a tremendous increase over last year, mainly due to the need that we saw with the applications that came in. So this year, I'm pleased to announce that we have $2.5 million for allocation to public grants. For those that aren't familiar, we use that share in public grants for two different types of support, both construction projects, one where you're actually hiring a contractor to make a capital improvement to a historic resource, and also for our planning projects, which are pre-development projects or ones that really deal with historic preservation projects in a community. There are some basic eligibility requirements for any applicant to our program. One, of course, is that the program is only available to nonprofit organizations and municipal government who own and operate a publicly accessible property. Our typical organizations that meet that requirement include colleges, conservancies, historic preservation organizations, historical societies and house museums, religious institutions, and local governmental entities. Individuals or for-profit corporations are unfortunately ineligible for our program. We also earmarked that support only to organizations who don't have access to other sources of the Keystone Fund. So groups that receive funding through other PHMC Keystone allocation, either associate groups of our sites or placed properties of the PHMC are not eligible, as well as libraries who receive funding through the Department of Education. And again, I will reiterate that individuals and for-profit corporations are not eligible to receive funding through the Keystone program. Also, to make an application to the Keystone, the organization must be in existence for 5 years. If you're not, we're certainly happy to help you identify a fiscal sponsor who would actually be the applicant for you. And again, that's part of the enabling legislation that created Keystone. So that's been a part of our program guidelines since the inception. And again, since the intent of the grant program is to improve public accessibility into historic buildings, if you're applying under the construction category, the property must be open and accessible to the public on a regular basis. And our rule of thumb is 100 days per year. If your building is not currently open, and this is sort of the incubator program or project that will start that at inception, there is the opportunity in the application to explain that there's limited access, but with this program will make a huge impact and will certainly open and make the building available to the public. One of the other major eligibility requirements for the program is that the property and project be associated with a National Register associated property. So it must be listed in or determined eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. It's part of the enabling legislation to focus really on those important and significant historic resources throughout the Commonwealth. The property does not need to be fully listed, either individually or contributing to a historic district, or it's been determined eligible for listing within the last 5 years. The application will ask for its National Register number. Please contact me or our National Register staff to receive the official letter and the property's unique number. Remember, we're not asking you to provide the National Park Service's NRIS number, but rather our SHPO resource number in the application. We can save you a tremendous amount of time than navigating the National Park Service programs looking for that NRIS number. Again, it's the SHPO number that we're looking for. Please remember that just because your property may be part of a locally significant or located within a locally designated HARD district does not necessarily mean that it meets this National Register status, but we can certainly verify what its eligibility is for you. Conversely, there is a number of applications that we receive that identify the resource as a National Historic Landmark. There are only 169 such resources in Pennsylvania with that distinction. So if you're not sure, please don't hesitate to confirm. We can provide you with the adequate information about your property's designation. Our request limits in the Keystone program for projects under the planning or pre-development category are limited to $5,000 to $25,000, and those requests in the construction category are $5,000 to $100,000. Both programs require a 50-50 cash match. In-kind matches may not count toward this cash requirement, but you can certainly recognize them in the project budget as over and above requests to help with your project costs. This cash match is very important because these are reimbursable grants. They are not direct award. So if you're selected for funding, you'll be requested to submit reimbursements quarterly, and you'll receive 50% of the current expenditures with those requests. I'm going to pause just for a few minutes to check in with Shelby to see if there's any questions coming through with the chat features, if anything comes up within the eligibility requirements of the grant program.
Karen, we have had no questions so far, so I take that to mean that you have covered everything and are doing a great job.
Oh,
Anybody who has questions about eligibility, if something comes to you later, please send it to me in the chat box, or make a note of it if for some reason you're not able to get into the chat box, and you can contact Karen with that question later. But I don't see any questions coming in, so why don't we just keep going?
You're also able to review our program guidelines on our website at any time, so if something's not clear within the webinar about eligibility requirements, you can also find that information there as well. So now to talk a little bit about how the application process works. If you're not familiar with it, we do have an annual deadline that typically is March the 1st. So this year it falls on a Friday. So Friday, March the 1st in 2019 is the application deadline. All of our applications are made through our sister agency of the Department of Community and Economic Development's electronic single application for assistance. Boy, that's a mouthful. I'm going to call it ESA for the remainder of our webinar, just for ease of sake. We transferred to the ESA system just a few years ago. Actually, this will be our second year in this program, to help really streamline the process for our applicants. It provides a consistent platform to our other grant-making agencies in the Commonwealth. We've been able to customize the application for our Keystone program, so you will notice some differences if you're a common user of the ESA. Also, the other positive thing about the ESA system is that our applicants have access to technical assistance throughout the application process from DCED's Customer Service Center. They're a very good partner, and certainly do not hesitate to give them a call if you're having any questions or problems with the system. They're available Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5, and have been very receptive through our last application round for assistance. So again, since our application deadline is March the 1st, you have until 11:59 p.m. to make your application before it automatically closes. After that date, you won't be able to get access to it. We're told that it works best in Google Chrome or Internet Explorer. Safari and Firefox platforms do not work very well with the ESA system. The very nice thing about the system itself is it accepts uploads of attachments and supporting documentation. So all of our friends will be very happy to note that you no longer need to mail in those copious large boxes of applications for us for evaluation. We've been told this is an improved time saver for our applicants, and we're happy to help you make the application process as streamlined and as easy as possible for you. If you're new to the ESA system, you may need to register as a first-time user. Your prior eGrant login credentials have not transferred over to this new system. But if you've used the ESA system for other grant making, your login profile should be consistent. Our grant staff, and again, the Customer Service Center folks, still recommend that you prepare the longer project narrative section in like a Microsoft Word or similar program, and then simply cut and paste it into the application at a later time. The ESA system does time out, much like our eGrant system, although you have a longer section. It's about 20 minutes on working on a single page before it kicks you out and it hasn't saved your work. So again, we do recommend, just for your own peace of mind, prepare some of those longer text sections in Microsoft Word. There are instructions throughout the applications that might give you more guidance for specific questions if you're not sure how to answer it. And then you'll also be able to find the program fact sheets, which have also additional guidelines. That's all available within the portal itself. So it's really a one-stop place for you to get any questions that you might need. Again, the nicest thing about it are the attachments. You're able to load your comment attachments, including letters of support, photographs, plans and specifications, and even your IRS verification directly into the portal. How our process works, we do use an independent grant review panel to select our funding recommendations. So when you hit submit on March the 1st, those applications immediately funnel into the commission and are referred to me and our grant staff, and we do initial confirmation of the eligibility, whether or not the organization is eligible to apply to the Keystone, and the project is associated with an eligible resource. After that, the applications are then divided into panels for evaluation, who read and rank those applications. Obviously, construction applicants in that category are evaluated very separately from those in the planning project category. But so typically we end up using 3 panels, one panel for the pre-development and planning category, and then 2 for the construction category. They all operate independently. They have different panels that work to read and evaluate those applications. Our outside panelists are generally preservation architects, municipal officials, either members of local HARB or CLG communities, or our heritage park representatives and preservation consultants. We do make sure that those applicants, our panelists, are located regionally throughout the Commonwealth. They're shared with the evaluation guidelines, and then their applications to be able to review and rank. They read your applications and evaluate them in 5 major categories. I'll share them with you now, but come to think of that again, you can find that very easily in the program fact sheets within the portal again, or on the application itself and how well it's prepared, what kind of prior planning that you've undertaken or the organization has taken to ensure that the planning project or construction project will go on without a hitch, which I know do not happen very often. But they want to make sure that your scope of work is adequate to cover the costs that are requested within your grant project. And we also look at how strong your project team that's in place, who have evaluated all of the alternatives necessary to create that scope of work. Thirdly, they look at the project itself, whether or not it's appropriate or sensitive to the historic character of the resource. They look at the community, whether or not it shows a large community support, whether the resource is well used and appreciated in the community. And then finally, whether or not it's a worthwhile investment of state funding. Our panelists generally meet in early May to evaluate them. They read them on their own, and they actually have a physical panel meeting in Harrisburg. And again, each panel meets individually. And they make their recommendations for the ranking and funding to the full commission who approve that ranking, hopefully, at their June 5th commission meeting. From there, you'll be notified whether or not you receive funding shortly thereafter in probably mid-June. And keep in mind that you won't be able to start your project until you get an executed grant contract. So your grant timeline is generally October 1st. So although you make your application March 1st, your project won't be able to start until October 1st. We do have a number of funding priorities that sort of dictates what our grant panelists are attracted to and then what the commission is really attracted to. Obviously, we look for very visible projects, ones that are in the community, and the project itself on the resource is also fairly visible and noticeable by its users. The significance of the resource, either historically or architecturally, and how this project will further the public's understanding of that importance. Projects that are very sensitive to the historic resource. Generally, preservation and restoration activities are very well received. We do fund a number of rehabilitation projects as well. Those projects that have a lot of public support and are perceived benefit to their community. Also, we pay very special attention to the action items that are in our statewide plan. For those who are not familiar with our newest Pennsylvania statewide historic preservation plan, we're happy to announce that we received approval from the National Park Service for our plan. It's a long undertaking, but we really worked at making sure that our grant applicants could find themselves in the plan. We'll stand a few minutes and talk about that next too. But I do encourage you to take a few minutes to read through the plan itself and evaluate how your project works to further the goals that we have in the statewide plan. If you've not ever seen the statewide plan, or you're sitting at your desk going, well, how can I find it? Have no fear, there's a link within the application itself to help you, or also you can find it on our website through the link on the PowerPoint and your PDF screens. To help further the conversation, we've also made this very helpful guideline for you too. For those who've not had a minute to take a look at the plan yet, I really do, again, encourage you to look through the whole plan. There are applications, links in the application that will help you direct you to all 4 of the main goals within the plan. And you can see they're fairly vague, and I'm sure it's fairly easy for you to coordinate your project to one of the action items under the goals. We, if you're not familiar, are required to prepare a plan every 4 years as a mandate to our funding from the National Park Service. This year, we've paid special attention to really bring in some public input to craft these 4 goals and their companion action items to really help all Pennsylvanians foster preservation in their communities. All of our Keystone funded projects must implement this plan in some way or another, but we're giving you the opportunity to explain how your project follows the action items and furthers that project under the plan. We're sharing this information with our grant review panel, and they also have to follow the responses and guide their selection process on how well you interpret and further our initiative within the plan. Again, I mentioned this just a few minutes ago, but our application deadline, in case you weren't sure, is Friday, March the 1st. You have to 11:59 p.m. And I do notice when you hit submit at 11:50 p.m. But you can feel free to keep working all up until that time period. Remember, you will not get an award notification until mid-June after our commission has approved the panel recommendations. And again, after that, we notify first your legislator and the grantee through an award letter, and then a press release is also sent out. But projects may not start until there's an executed contract, and we generally estimate that date as being October 1st. You are not able to be reimbursed for any of the expenses that occur prior to the execution of the grant contract period. And again, you have a full 24 months to implement your project. We're going to take a few minutes to check in on questions again. And Shelby, has anything come in?
Yes, we've had a couple of questions come in, Karen. The first is from Aaron. What source of cash match are eligible? For example, are lines of credit, loans, private contributions, other state governmental or federal government funds considered for cash match?
Yes to all of those. We'll cover the cash match in just a few minutes, but yes, you can either use other state or federal grants, private contributions, or organizational funds to achieve that requirement.
Okay, we have another question that came in from Mike Taylor. $5,000 minimum plus 50-50 match. Does this mean minimum total eligible project would be $10,000?
Exactly.
Okay. Nia Koss says, I may have missed this, but does the property itself need to be registered, or can it just be located in a designated historic district?
It can be considered contributing to a National Register eligible or listed historic district. And that would mean, obviously, that its significance is derived either during a construction period within the period of significance for the historic district, So just because it's in the boundaries of it doesn't necessarily make it eligible, but we can confirm with the inventory of the historic district whether or not that property contributes to the significance of the district.
All right, this one is also related to that. If a project, this is from Tim Ishman, if a project is not registered as a historical site presently or sits in a designated district, how does that affect the 3/1 submittal deadline and 2019 funding possibility?
We encourage you to start working on your National Register eligibility requirements now. You're welcome to go ahead and submit an application through the portal by the March 1st deadline so you can be evaluated. As you noticed, our grant panels don't meet until May. We make a note on that particular application for the panelists to read that one last, or towards the end once they receive verification from our National Register staff that the National Register eligibility questions have been answered. So please feel free to start the eligibility process with our National Register staff, and that can happen concurrently with the grant application. At worst, for some reason, if the staff here at the PA SHPO don't feel that the property is eligible for the National Register, you've started an application that you might need to be put on hold for next year until that question is answered.
Okay, Spencer asks, how many letters of support are recommended or needed?
We recommend 2 to 3, and I'll follow that in a few minutes too, but we certainly encourage you to reach out to your legislators, mainly for them to know what's happening for your organization within their district as well. But a lot of the community support letters are better to come from people who use and appreciate your historic resource. So again, 2 to 3. The grant review panels really do read them. They notice if they're current and if they really speak from the heart and really talk about not only the importance of your historic resource and the project that you're undertaking.
All right, Kathy Kalinowski asks, can the estimate needed to do the work be covered under the grant?
I think that you're asking me if preparation of your contract documents and all of the contracting bids and specifications be eligible. We do encourage you, if it's a fairly robust project, to get those numbers to apply under our planning category to really prepare those construction documents. We do allow you to prepare some construction management and as part of a construction category, but that's really capped to about 20% of the contract of the grant budget itself. And for the most part, to be competitive, most of those questions might be derived as part of the deliberation process. So it's probably better to have most of those functions and questions already answered before you come in to make an application.
All right, our last question for this little bit of a question break is from Bob Fisher. He asks, is replacement of an unsafe roof on a registered historical site eligible for a construction grant?
Yes.
Okay. Those were great questions, everybody. Keep them coming in. We really appreciate them. If you felt that you didn't quite get the answer you were looking for, please get in touch with Karen by giving her a call or sending an email, and you can talk more specifically about your particular project.
Okay, we're going to go on to talk a little bit further about typical projects that we see under our planning category. You might be familiar if you're a longtime friend of the either the Bureau for Historic Preservation under our old name or the PA SHPO office about the old historic preservation project grants that used to be funded out of our history and museum project line item. Although that particular grant program was eliminated, we really felt that those were important projects to continue supporting through our community and throughout the Commonwealth. So we sort of rolled that aspect of the application into the Keystone program. So we kind of created this hybrid out of the Keystone guidelines for these smaller projects that have more planning in focus. Again, they do need to support or be associated with a National Register listed or eligible property, either one individually listed or part of a historic district. And I will note that some of these under the planning project categories really take on the aspects of the construction project, since these are, again, reimbursable and require a cash match. They do use a slightly different grant application in the portal, the ESA system, so make sure that you are applying under the correct category. Again, if you're making a physical change to a building, you want to apply under the construction category. If you are doing a regional plan, National Register nomination, cultural resource survey, archaeological project, or anything that would be considered a pre-development or planning project, please apply under the planning category. We receive about a third of the total number of applications in this category, and we very much encourage applicants to use and utilize this, especially for preparing the planning documents in a later construction category. They're very helpful in making sure that you're really thoughtfully approaching a restoration or preservation project in a building. Typical projects that we see are cultural resource surveys, either historic site surveys, archaeological surveys, or thematic and context surveys. They must follow our current guidelines for survey and make sure that you're very much producing data that can be uploaded into our CRGIS or eventually into our new PA share system. Because in theory, this is supporting an already eligible or listed historic resource, you may not request a determination of eligibility as part of the larger project. We certainly understand that you might be preparing our Pennsylvania Historic Resource Survey forms, but that actual request of a determination of eligibility must happen outside of the project. The survey itself, for those who might not be familiar with what that is either an inventory of a historic building, either within a region or municipality. You can do it by function or association rather than a geographic survey. They generally capture the locational, architectural, or historic significance of individual resources, and they're able to tie them together about how they are associated. If you're trying to make an application under this category, I very much encourage you to include a map of the area to be surveyed, the expected number of resources to be surveyed, and a timetable for you to complete your survey. There is a section in the program fact sheet that provides some additional information about what you should be including in your project narrative to help explain your survey methodology. And again, your survey project itself needs to be compatible with our CRGIS and PA share. You'll be required and requested to meet with our staff to make sure that that project is coming in and will be of use to other users throughout the Commonwealth outside of your local community. Our project grants can also be used for National Register nominations. For those who might, I've been saying that word a lot, and I'm kind of assuming that all of you are familiar with what the National Register is. But if you're not, a brief 5-second elevator speech here is the official program or listing of properties that are worthy of preservation and recognized by the federal government. We have a whole system of how we evaluate National Register properties. The PA SHPO office has a role in that evaluation process. So our website talks very cohesively about how properties achieve significance to the National Register. I don't want to waste too much time on how to do that, but certainly I can connect you with our National Register staff or answer any questions you might have. But if your goal is to complete a full nomination or registration of a specific property, we do encourage you to make sure that there is a recent evaluation or determination of eligibility that's been done within the last 5 years or so that our National Register staff can concur with both the boundary or the area significance that you're proposing for the resource. I encourage that for the most part because that mapping and boundary requirements really are important, that they've already been decided and are concurred with our office, because that can really dramatically change the size and scale and scope of your project, and more importantly, the cost. So you don't want to be requesting $5,000 for a $10,000 project when in all points that our staff feels that the larger resource is really, another 400 buildings, which will dramatically increase how much survey or narrative that you have to prepare as part of the nomination. I will say that we do have a priority over historic district requests and applications over individual property nominations, mainly because of the increased impact throughout the community. But we do accept those nominations for individual properties. We generally require that, or hope that your application makes a very strong case for why National Register nomination or listing is very important for Commonwealth funds, or how that listing will further the preservation of that particular resource. Under the planning category, we also allow for archaeological projects. I'm going to be the first to admit that I am not an archaeologist. I say that an awful lot. I work with a lot of really fine archaeologists, and we do pull them in for a lot of those projects. But those, for the most part, can deal with regional site sensitivity models, either a research or artifact analysis of a particular site, or something that's called a temporal analysis, which again, I smile and nod because I really don't know what that means, but again, our other staff members do. The question that always arises with archaeological projects, remember that the site has to be already determined for eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, which sometimes can be a little backwards for how we evaluate or want to excavate a historic site. But again, we do fund those archaeological projects very, very frequently. We do feel that they are very important to be able to assist our partners with those projects. We also receive applications for under planning and development, and we actually see probably the most number of these types of requests. These can run the gamut of preservation plans for specific resource or historic structures reports. We do see some regional plans, and if you are proposing a regional preservation plan for a specific community, I do encourage you to reach out to our community preservation coordinators, either Bill Callahan, Corey Kegerice, or Brian Van Sweden, to kind of talk about what your methodology or work products will be as part of that project. And then also under this category, or subcategory, I guess, are architectural plans and specifications for a future construction project. All of our pre-construction projects must be in compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. I'll talk a little bit more about what that concept is under our construction category discussion. But again, as I mentioned before, I do very much encourage you, if you're thinking of a construction category and a lot of those plans and specifications are not yet prepared, that you consider coming in to us under a planning category project first in a prior round. It does help you shape a more competitive application if that work has already been completed. We're going to pause again for questions if anyone has anything related to our planning category.
Karen, we do. We have one, which I believe you have just answered, from David Brown. He asked, if you apply and receive a planning grant, does that help if and when we apply for a larger construction grant?
Yes, you are correct. I should also mention, because I think I didn't say this, that you can apply in one application year for only one category. So in other words, if you can't apply this fiscal grant, right. Oh, and another little note. who's working on lattice on a porch. So, okay, should be back in the same spot. Okay, again, so your construction categories, much like the planning category, these are buildings that are listed in or eligible for listing in the National Register. They're publicly accessible. Yes, it's okay for a historic house museum to be charging an admission fee to meet that eligibility requirements, but they're people who are coming in to view and enjoy your historic property. Grant awards are $5,000 to $100,000. Remember, there's a cash match, so your overall project costs are $10,000 to $200,000. We are a state agency, so all the prevailing wage provisions may very well be apropos to your project. So keep that in mind as you're assembling contractor estimates as a whole. That can increase your project costs. Typically, for the most part, eligible activities under the construction guidelines really include preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation treatments under the Secretary of Interior standards. They are true construction projects. You hire a contractor or subcontractor and they make a capital improvement to a historic property. The funds are the most basic capital improvements that are beyond basic maintenance. So if you're proposing just to paint or caulk, that really is cyclical or routine maintenance and wouldn't be eligible under our program. But again, you can always refer to the program fact sheet for further explanations of any of the potential cost categories related to your project and the budget. But think of the things that you would normally do with a historic building that would be eligible under our program. So it's site work, if you've got to improve water runoff for grade issues, gutters, downspouts, masonry repair, door and window repair or replacement, interior, exterior finish repair, mechanical upgrades, including HVAC systems, metal work if you've got a pressed ceiling that needs to be restored, and we also improve accessibility or ADA compliant improvements in a historic property. Ineligible activities under our program, we cannot fund new construction. So if you are proposing an addition to your museum, unfortunately that is not eligible under our Keystone grants. We also can't reconstruct a missing building from the landscape. As I mentioned before, routine or cyclical maintenance is not eligible. And although site work is non-historic features like parking lots or sidewalks or plantings would not be eligible. And those properties or projects that would be eligible under our planning category, like archaeological excavations or pre-development work, are not eligible under the construction category. And although you might be familiar with DCNR's Keystone and grant programs, although they allow acquisition, the PHMC do not allow acquisition of historic sites or properties under our program. All projects must meet the Secretary of Interior treatment for historic properties. That would be, if you're not familiar with them, again, I can provide you with a lot of guidance with it, and your project team might be a little bit more well-versed on what the standard treatments are. But these standards are a set of 10 guidelines or principles that help identify what the character defining features of a historic building are and how to preserve that feature. So as a rule of thumb, you're maintaining as much of the historic category of the building as possible. Let's say you've got deteriorated wood windows, but you certainly can repair those windows. That would follow as an appropriate treatment guidelines under the standards. Know that all proposed work must be reviewed and approved by PHMC staff prior to construction. And we may need to negotiate the scope of work to bring it in compliance with the standards if you're selected for funding. So please keep that in mind. If for some reason it's a good project, we like a little bit of it, but maybe what you're proposing is slightly out of line of what the standards would recommend, we may need to change your scope of work if you're selected for funding. The standards are talked about in many different ways, in many different places. So I don't want to spend too much time here in our webinar talking about them, but again, the National Park Service has some very helpful guidance on how to interpret the standards. They prepare things that are called preservation briefs that are typically dealing with specific categories of a historic building, either a storefront, restoring your slate roof, that you can find some guidance. There's also technical notes on specific features of a historic building. I know that some of the sections of the Park Service website aren't accessible right now, but hopefully that will be solved in a few minutes, or a few days, weeks. But we can also find that information on our website as well. We'll pause for questions again for those, anything that arose under the construction category. Again, it's our very most popular component of our Keystone grant.
Kathy Kalinowski had a question. Can 2 applications be funded if one comes from local historical foundation and one from municipality for 2 different projects?
Yes, well, as long as they are associated with the same building. I don't think that's what you're asking, but certainly we can accept 2 applications for 2 different projects within a community itself, but not for the same building or resource.
That was our only question.
I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about what makes a competitive application. I certainly encourage you to reach out to our staff. Both myself or our community preservation coordinators are more than happy to talk about your project over the next several weeks. We can make suggestions to you to ensure that you have all of the relevant information or required attachments. Our best applications, or the ones that are funded the most, are concise, but completely explain what's being accomplished. For example, if you're doing survey, you've described what you're surveying, what you're capturing with part of the survey, how many resources are being surveyed, and what will happen with that survey. Under the construction category, if you're talking about a window repair project, explain how and why they're being repaired. Are the carpenters able to make simple Dutchman repairs? Is something really deteriorated? Do you show photographs of what that deterioration is? If the deterioration is so severe that it can't be repaired, it has to be replaced, share with us what alternatives you've considered and what your proposed project scope, how it matches the existing and how it meets the standards. Well-planned projects are generally the ones that get funded. Include a well-versed project team that explore all of the options and understand the complexities of the project, that your sequencing is done in the proper order. For instance, that you aren't repairing decorative interior plasterwork before you've identified and repaired the water leak that caused it. That's a lot of the discussion in our deliberation during our panels, or whether or not they really have thought about what's causing condensation on the windows and do they need to be repaired if you've not looked at the HVAC system or other thermal issues. We very much encourage you to include specific estimates from contractors or consultants as attachments. Again, if it's coming under the construction category, share with them that you're exploring funding from a state agency and the project may need to comply with the prevailing wage rates. That will increase your labor costs, and you want to make sure that they are familiar with those requirements. We had a note that we've lost audio, so is anyone else or is it just Kathy? Oh, good, thank you, Kathy. Other things that make a competitive application, very much we are attracted to projects that are very visible in a community and will have a strong impact. For that reason, carefully consider who prepares your letters of support. I know I mentioned this before, but the panelists do read them. They notice when they're a form letter that don't really indicate true support, or if they're directed at another funding program, or if they're out of date. So please reach out to your legislators, but don't forget the man on the street who uses your historic building or enjoys, either the food pantry that your church has or some other way that really recognizes the historic significance of the building. Those projects that are true in preservation or restoration in nature tend to rank a little better. Remember, our panelists are not PA SHPO staff, so explain why your building is significant and worthy of preservation and how this treatment will further either its interpretation or its long-term preservation. That's really important. Our commission tends to want to help projects that might not get finished without our financial commitment or involvement, and that will really make an impact or enhance the community's understanding of that historic resource. or preservation in general if it's a community plan. If you aren't certain if you have adequate planning in place, consider applying for a project grant. I can't say that enough. You hire a consultant who will help you assess the situation of what's really wrong with the building and make sure that you're addressing those issues appropriately. We do include and allow you to include photographs. Include photographs. Again, much like explaining why your building is important, including photographs of what it looks like from the outside really will further our understanding of the grant review panel's understanding of the resources and any challenges it has. For example, if you're talking about a deteriorated roof that needs to be replaced, climb up on the roof if it's safe, or have your estimate provide you with some pictures of it that really show either deteriorated flashing or holes in the roof, damages from the inside that really demonstrate how much of a problem this and the challenge that has to be addressed. That includes for project grants too. Obviously, their recommendations are a little differently. But I can't address this or stress this enough. We have 137,000 historic properties in all of the Commonwealth, almost 26,000 archaeological sites. We're not always as well versed about those projects, so photographs are very helpful in understanding both from the staff perspective and the grant review panel to understand what type of building we're talking about or is asking for support. If you're selected for funding, I want to spend a few minutes because I know we're getting close to running out of time. I guess I talked a little bit longer than I thought I would, plus our technical difficulties were a challenge. Know that you'll have to execute a contract with the Commonwealth. Your plans and specifications will have to be submitted for approval. Under the construction category, you're required to post a project sign acknowledging PHMC support. You're also required to submit a declaration of covenant, which I can explain a little bit of what that is. It's a legal document, so talk to your solicitors first. I'm happy to share what the provisions of that covenant is, but it's basically telling you that, or the organization or county entity is agreeing to maintain the property, keeping it open for public accessibility for a period of generally 15 years, depending on the grant award amount. But again, I'm happy to share it with you. It is a part of the terms and condition that if after you're selected for funding, you decide you don't wish to execute a covenant, your grant will be withdrawn and canceled. You're also asked to submit quarterly reporting, and that is very important. We like to maintain contact with you throughout the project to understand how it's going and what challenges you might be having. You make reimbursement requests. Remember, you will not get a check right up front to do the project. As you assume expenses, you will submit them for reimbursement. And finally, at the conclusion of your project, we do ask that you provide final reports and any final work products that can be shared with the commission as a whole. Moving forward, even though our webinar today may end, you certainly have access to additional support throughout the application process. You can read through the project guidelines or program guidelines on our website, review the YouTube videos for both the application how-to and the webinar of today. You can access me at any time and throughout the grant process, either with questions about whether or not if your project's eligible or what should be included in your application, or if you're having problems with your login information with the ESA, reach out to customer service. They're more than happy to do that. And then don't forget that there are program fact sheets in the gray navigation bar of the application. Many times I've tried to anticipate what your questions might be, in especially the project narrative or the program addendum, to help you figure out what's asked in that particular question. I'm going to quickly turn it over to Shelby before we conclude with our final questions, if that's okay.
Yes, actually, we had one come in, and since we're just about at time, I'm going to break here with Karen's format and read the one question that came in from Kenneth Moore. Would PHMC consider a construction project where matching funds are available, but total project funding is not yet in place, e.g. conducting a capital campaign?
That's fine. You don't have to have your matching funds in place at the time of the application. There is a section in the program addenda that allows you to explain what your fundraising plan is and identify whether or not the plans you have in place are in hand, solicited, or pledged toward your project. You'll just need to show within maybe 3 or 4 months of the execution of the grant contract that you've got available funds in place to start your project. Good question. Thank you.
Okay, we don't have any other come in, but if something occurs to you after we've hung up here in the next couple of moments, please get in touch with Karen. I am going to take just the last minute, maybe a minute and a half for those of you who can hang on with us, to tell you a little bit about something that we started within the last several months related to the release of Pennsylvania's new statewide historic preservation plan, which is titled Preservation Happens Here. It is in fact a hashtag that was on purpose. And this really embodies the ideas that we're trying to promote with the plan, that there are great preservation activities happening every day across Pennsylvania. We might not realize it, recognize them, and we're certainly not celebrating everything that's going on out there. It is the title of the plan, and we're using this hashtag in a couple of ways, and you can see two there that I put down to really promote the plan and preservation outcomes in Pennsylvania, and also to kind of track our public engagement and see who we're reaching and who we need to reach. So the hashtag, everybody, if you're on social media, you're probably familiar with the hashtag. I won't go through all of these, but we would love for you to participate in this campaign with us and put the Preservation Happens Here hashtag in your social media posts, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, for places where you go and you think that this is a great example of preservation happening, or something that you're involved in. Certainly all of the work that you're doing with your projects that may be, you may be applying for Keystone funding, they would certainly be Preservation Happens Here projects. So we love to follow along on social media and kind of see what everybody is up to. You can also kind of see what everybody else throughout Pennsylvania is up to by just typing the hashtag in your favorite search engine and seeing what comes back. So up here quickly are just some examples of how people have used the Preservation Happens Here hashtag. One, to promote a workshop for the American Planning Association Pennsylvania Chapter Southeast meeting that they had a few months ago, and the Pennsylvania Turnpike uses it quite a bit to talk about the history and the importance of the Turnpike. So one of the biggest reasons why you may want to start using the Preservation Happens Here hashtag, not only will you get the chance to be featured in one of our newsletters, in our monthly newsletter, but we're also using the hashtag to come crowdsource potential recipients of our next Community Initiative Award. This is an award that the SHPO has started giving out to recognize preservation happening in all of our different partners and their activities. So every time you use the Preservation Happens Here hashtag, we see it and you get added to the list for either your project or your organization or somebody who's working individually in a community to make sure that preservation happens there. Next slide, Karen. So we'll take some questions. I went through that very quickly. You can find more information about the hashtag on our blog. I don't see any questions coming in, so we have one more slide that I will end on. The best way to stay connected to us to find out about more opportunities like this webinar is to check in with our blog. We publish every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. You can get information there about the Keystone grants. You can see good examples of Keystone projects by searching for Keystone grants in the search bar. Certainly by getting some information about the Community Initiative Award. And at the blog website is where you can also sign up for our newsletters that two go out monthly and then one goes out twice a year, the Metal Trust Bridge newsletter. I see we had one question pop in there, so we will take this last one and then we will sign off. Laurel has asked, would volunteer hours qualify as cash match?
Unfortunately not. Again, it's in-kind and staff salaries, in-kind and volunteer hours don't meet the cash requirement.
All right, well, we had a few technical difficulties there. Thank you very much for hanging in with us today. We appreciate your time and we appreciate your interest in Pennsylvania's historic places. If you have any further questions, we have one from Tyler here that we'll take, but if anybody else needs to sign off, thank you, and we'll be sending around a survey, and please get back to us with any questions.
Tyler, if I read your question correctly, you were curious about what kind of entity would be the applicant for a project that was proposing a National Register Historic District. That could come from the city itself, if you're talking about a city or borough, or if there is some kind of community engagement preservation organization, they could be the applicant too. But I think we would probably want to have some kind of letter of support from the municipality as well, that they're also interested in the historic district occurring in their geographic boundaries. Thanks again for everyone for bearing with our technical difficulties. I've enjoyed our time together this morning. Look for additional information on our YouTube channel if you want to reach back into our and view or listen again into the recording of this particular webinar, or reach out if you have any other questions. Good luck with your applications, and we look forward to reading more about your project.